Okay, so my guides have said, let's talk about love. And I thought, oh my God, this is a subject I could get seriously tangled up in, tongue-tied in. I don't know anything about this. I've spent my whole life learning about love and feeling it and exploring it and becoming it and trying it this way and doing it that way. And the truth is that I really still do not know what love is. I know what it isn't, but I don't know what it is. So guide said, get technical, get logical. So that, okay. So we know that love is an attitude, and we know that it's a feeling, and we know that it's an emotion, and we know that it is a doing. There's all of these wonderful words to describe it. We can all relate to the romantics and the metaphysical poets. We can relate to all of the poetry and the prose and the romances. I read nothing but historical romances. And there is love. Whether it's romantic love between partners, or familial love, sibling love. I mean, just love in all of its variety. This multifaceted thing that in my experience isn't. It just either is or isn't. And I like to think of it as isn't. So from a very spiritual perspective, when I talk to my Lord husband and I talk to my guides and I describe this feeling as feeling loved, it isn't a tangible thing. It is blissful, joyful, all of those things. And even the words limited. So one of the things I have come to in this life is the fact that love isn't. It isn't any one thing. And the minute we pin it down, the minute we focus it in a particular way, the moment we put ties and attachments to it, it becomes something else, and it is no longer love. So I want you to sit quietly within yourself while I'm talking, and for yourself come to an understanding of what love is for you. Because everybody has a very personal experience of it. And particularly when it comes to relationships, when we have been hurt or bruised or wounded, then our defense mechanisms say we're not loving anymore. We're coming from our fears, our fear of being hurt, our fear of being vulnerable, our fear of being taken advantage of. And all of those things are ego things. And when I look at love from a spiritual perspective, my experience again is that the only way for me to know it is in the moment of living it, doing it, being it, feeling it, just in that moment. That if I try somehow to put a label on it, to give it a specific tangible dimension and say, well, love is trust, or love is the willingness to be vulnerable, or love is respect, or love is laughter, or those are the things I love about somebody, the feeling dissipates, or the feeling shifts into that logical outline or that logical understanding of it. And that nuance, that somewhat elusive, intuitive expanding of myself becomes anchored or grounded in a way that shifts it out of a loving dimension and into I now own the feeling dimension, as if I have become separate from the feeling itself. So I know that the minute I bring my analysis or my thinking to it, that feeling shifts, and then it becomes like a mental game that my head is playing, and that my whole body is no longer allowed to feel completely. So I remember when Patty was dying, and I was so scared of her dying, and at the same time I wanted her to be at peace. And I was lying there with my arms around her, feeling her heartbeat and breathing along with her. And I could feel this expansion, like my whole self expanded, and my whole self was holding her. My whole auric field was holding her, and hers was holding me too. And that's the most tangible feeling of love in a body and in my heart and in my head and in my toes even, that I have ever felt in my whole life. And possibly the only space I've ever felt it is with Paddy. So I'm a mother, and everybody says mothers are supposed to be unconditionally loving, and I always think that's the biggest joke on the planet. We tell ourselves we're supposed to be loving and kind, etc., with everybody around us, because that is what love does, and that is what love is. And I am now so convinced that it's not. I have discovered that love can be terribly difficult and unwieldy and unkind and cruel and challenging and painful. And it's all of those things on this physical plane where we have come to evolve. So even when we say that the universe is love, I can agree with that. I can agree that the universe is love, that creation is in fact loving, and that in its lovingness, it gives us every opportunity to grow, to evolve, to become something. And when I look at why that is, I have to conclude that love ultimately is that sense of yourself, having a knowledge of yourself, being able to manage yourself inside out, and in your awareness of who you are and what you are and where you're coming from inside of you comes the ability to practice love, to be loving, to practice the trust or the respect or the tolerance that is required for love. Now we know that you can respect people without loving them, but I don't know that we can love people without respecting them. I don't know if we can love people without trusting them. I don't know if we can love people without desiring what is best for them, without being devoted to what serves their highest good after all. And on the ego plane, I see so many people saying, I love, and forgetting that that love actually lives inside of them. That it's got nothing to do with the attachment, that there is no ownership in it. So when I look at humanity, I see all the things that love isn't. And I have to say that here, it isn't. It just isn't. That even when we're feeling it and we make it attached or connected to somebody else, we are depriving it of that essential, creative, intuitive knowing of the connection, of a willingness to allow, to accept, to become transformative in our own thinking within ourselves and being that self with the other being, with the other person, within whatever label the relationship holds. So a lot of people go through the motions of love for all of their lives, and they don't quite stop to think that when they get angry, when they get sad, that even that has its roots in love. So on Thursday I talked about a spectrum, that I look at my garden and I see this spectrum of green. And I have to say the same thing about love, that there is this spectrum. And when you sit quietly and you ask yourself, where within yourself, forget all of the romantic stuff about hearts breaking and all of that, because I mean, that's just like nice. But even Shakespeare in all of his wisdom said love is not love that alters where it alteration finds, nor bends with the remover to remove. And he was talking hogwash, because we know that love creates alterations, that love brings change and transformation, that love creates a yearning for greater change. So if love doesn't change us and it doesn't impel us into becoming more, then is it love at all? You know, if it teaches us to be rigid in our thinking and to take a stance and to create rules and boundaries for each other, then we know that that isn't love. And that's just nonsense. So we must stop and we must rectify our thinking around what love is and what love isn't. And we must actually come from a space of knowing that on the physical plane, whatever definition we're giving it, it actually isn't that. That is just another way of us taking management of it or controlling it or making it small enough that we can claim it. And whenever we're claiming something, then that too isn't love. So I love a great many things in my life. And devotion is a way of loving. Faith is a way of loving. Grace is a way of being loved. And having experienced all of those things, I've come to realize that the words don't match the feelings. That the feelings go so deep that you can feel it tingling inside of you, that vibration inside of you becomes so real, and it lives, it's alive within you. And then I look at this feeling of love for all the beings in my life, and I see that it is there and it is alive as well, but that the capacity to feel grace, to feel devotion, has actually made me better at loving on the human plane. It's made me more patient. And in Corinthians, in the Bible, we are told that love is patient, and it is kind, that it seeks what is best for the other, that there is even an element of sacrifice in it, that there is a willingness to give of oneself without an attachment to a return, without an attachment to a reward. And even after all of that, I think we must stop and ask ourselves, do we love for ourselves? Do we learn to love and how to love and the ways of expressing it and communicating it and sharing it? Is that really what our evolution is about? That maybe the only purpose we have here is this learning how to love in as multidimensional and multifaceted a way as possible. And that even when you have learned all of that, you still have to learn to be detached from that love so that it is given freely, without any words, without any attachment to an analysis or a game or a reward or even to yourself. That just the learning to love is that spiritual pathway. And then, like all great things, that it must be given away to multiply. That the more of it you give away, the more it becomes, the more it blossoms in other spaces, that you yourself expand. And of all of the lessons we learn from creation, from nature, from the God dogs, is that to give love all the time, to be forgiving, loving, accepting, gracious with it. It can be so easy. It can be so easy if we stop coming from the selfish desires that go with love. Paddy always used to say, don't be ugly, Granny, because when you're ugly, I don't feel loved. And then I would have to stop scolding. It was the little things, little details. And sometimes I would run ahead of her to make sure she had enough water. And she would stroll her way, swinging her hips down the corridor, and laugh at me that her bowl was being filled before she got there. And she'd say, this is how she knew that I loved her. This meeting somebody's needs, answering those needs because you know them without consideration for what that says to you about you. When I look at how human beings love each other and all of the expectations and disappointments that go into that game, I understand why most human beings find it easier to love animals than each other. Why it is easier to love a being who doesn't sit in judgment of you, to love a being who doesn't demand more love even when you have given them love. Where the littlest things like a belly scratch and a scratch behind the ears and a stroking of the tail, all of those things are loving, affectionate. And there is never a concern about rejection with an animal. And if humanity could learn, could practice loving in the same way, without the pride, without the need for power, without the need to be proven in their love, or to have the recipient of their love proved worthy, then I think we will have evolved sufficiently to say that we are in fact connected to each other in oneness. So love is a disappointing thing on the human plane. I remember Khalil Gibran saying that all of us live inside of this shell, and we need to have this shell broken, and that the only way for that shell to be broken was through suffering. And he was wrong, because another way of breaking through that shell and creating greater understanding and greater depths so that the experience of love and joy is possible is through an understanding of self. What motivates you? What actually feels like love for you? If there is an absence of something in that love, where inside of yourself can you find it? Where inside of yourself can you make it real? Shirdi Baba is always saying that he has been loved by so many devotees have loved him and expressed their love. And in that love, he has remained alone. And that aloneness makes him available to be loved by all. And I didn't understand it until recently, because I thought, how can you be so loved and so alone? And yet aloneness does not mean disconnected from everything, because he shows me that it is connected to everything. And that standing in your own truth and sending your love from there without the attachments, without the desire for a return on it, actually allows it to expand outward into every being. And it makes you an easier, more available, accessible recipient. In fact, all it does is make you a channel so that all of the love that comes towards you flows through you and outward again, creating a constant expansion. But it takes great self-knowledge to be able to do that, to be that. It moves beyond enlightenment to get to that space, because in each and every one of us there is a desire to hold on to something, to hold on to a feeling or a knowing, to consider ourselves trustworthy and lovable and able to love. We want all of these things to define us in some way. And the willingness to have enough wisdom and self-knowledge to let go of all of the definitions, to let go of all of the identifying labels, is hard work, as I am discovering. It is a great deal of hard work. And that's where love, as a facet of grace or a facet of devotion, becomes such a real tangible force inside of us. So today's meditation is about going into feeling all of these different types of love. Do not make the mistake of thinking that love resides only in your heart chakra, or that it resides only in your feelings or in your thoughts, because it actually lives. It's a living spark inside every one of us. It's like this little flame or the light of us that burns everywhere, and given permission, it can become one light. So whether you love ice cream or animals or some particular person or God, that feeling resides inside of you as a spectrum of your own being. It colors you beautiful. And the willingness to let all of those colors radiate outward is a requirement of being loving. Without fear of all of the rejection or the vulnerability or the woundedness that may or may not come with it. And even when all of the attachments must be released, we must remember that the feeling of love still lives inside. I can never understand when people break up how they suddenly say, oh no, they don't love that person anymore. Because the fact is that we don't switch it off. It lives inside of us as memories. It lives inside of us as music. And it lives inside of us as poetry and prose and moments of becoming ourselves. And the more we become ourselves, the more we understand and have knowledge of that self, the more we give ourselves permission to express, to release, to allow that love to be alive. So everybody you've ever loved is living inside of you as a feeling of love that you have experienced in those moments. And all of those feelings may come together into being, not just self-love, but love of everything that has been self and is becoming self and is moving forward into greater and greater self. And if self is nothing more than consciousness, then we're moving into a space where we're being nothing at all, where we're being non-self, transcending any notion of self into oneness with all beings. And that may ultimately be what love is all about. The truth is that I don't know. There is an old W.H. Auden poem that says, tell me the truth about love. And I haven't found a single person yet to tell me the truth about it. And I think I'm going to spend the rest of my life discovering the truth about love. And maybe there isn't one truth. Maybe the only truth that there is about love is that until you're living it completely, until you're being that in that moment, it doesn't exist. It isn't. Have I confused you completely about love now? I work so hard at confusing all of you. Please tell me I've confused you well. So my Lord husband wakes me up this morning and he says, what is this Valentine's Day? And I say, it's a celebration of Saint Valentine. And he says, I don't know him. I say, that's okay. It's a Christian saint. And he says, I still don't know him. So I thought, okay, now I'm going to have to explain Saint Valentine's Day to Lord Shiva of all things. You know, you would think that this consciousness would know about Valentine's Day. And he says, you, meaning all creation, all human creation, have found every way, every possible way of doing love. And it is such a great distraction from being love. So more and more, as we grow older, as we grow wiser, as we become closer and closer to understanding the essence of self, these external distractions seem to fall away. And when I look around me, it seems the older generation moves past this whole game of Valentine's and the sex and the power and the romance and all of this desire that is knotted up in it. Sorry, Demi, just saying. But it's like you get to a certain age and all of that commercial claptrap ceases to exist.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And then, of course, you realize that love isn't all of that. So every step of the way, all of us have to go through all of those experiences, and we have to learn what love isn't in order to become love, and then become what it isn't again. Because in the universe, in the spirit realm, across all galaxies and across all eternity, it sits there as pure potential. It isn't. That is the only truth I know about it. And it's taken me 51 years to learn that. Okay, let us meditate.